Hey, let me ask you something. If a country's economy grows 5%, that's good news, right? Pretty obvious. But what if millions of people there feel like their lives are completely falling apart? Would you still call that success? Today I want to talk about China. Not the China in headlines screaming collapse or triumph. The real China people live in. Something weird is happening right now. Western media says China is collapsing. Chinese state media says everything's great. So who's right? Here's the twist. Maybe they're both right, and maybe they're both wrong at the same time. Let me explain what I mean. Picture this. It's 2024. Beijing announces GDP growth hitting nearly 5%. Trade surplus, a record $1.2 trillion. On paper, China looks unstoppable. The economic engine keeps roaring, factories pumping out goods for the entire world to buy. But here's what those numbers don't show you. Walk through any Chinese city today. Talk to regular people on the street. You'll feel something different. There's a Chinese phrase going viral, Tang. It means lying flat. Basically giving up on trying. Young people are saying, why try so hard when the system feels rigged? Does that sound like a thriving economy to you? And here's what really got me curious. Know where Chinese people discuss their economic struggles openly? YouTube. Not Weibo or WeChat. YouTube is literally banned in China. They use VPNs just to access it. Why go through all that trouble? Think about it. Because inside China, talking negatively about the economy can get you in serious trouble. Censors are always watching, always listening. So they come here, to platforms outside the Great Firewall, to share what they cannot say at home. Isn't that telling? When citizens risk punishment just to describe daily struggles, that tells you something important about the gap between official stories. So today we're digging into this mystery together. Numbers say one thing, people say another. What's actually happening in China? I promise, by the end, this will challenge how you think about success, progress, and what economies are even supposed to do. Because the real question isn't whether China's economy is growing or collapsing. The real question is something much deeper than that. It's this. When a nation wins on the scoreboard but its people feel like they're losing, whose reality actually counts? Ready to find out? Let's start with the scoreboard, the official numbers. Because honestly, they look impressive at first glance. China's GDP in 2024 grew around 5%. For context, the US grew about 2.5%. Europe, barely 1%. China's trade surplus hit $1.2 trillion. That's trillion with a T, the highest ever. Exports still dominating global markets. If you're just looking at the national scorecard, you'd think, what's the problem? China's clearly winning. You'd have a point. But here's where it gets interesting. Let me show you the other numbers, the ones that hit people where they actually live. Housing prices. In 2025, home values across China are falling. Forecasts say they'll keep dropping through 2026, maybe even longer. Here's why that matters so much. In China, real estate isn't just where you live, it's where most families store their entire wealth. The World Bank says property makes up a huge chunk of household assets in China, way higher than most Western countries. So when housing prices drop, Chinese families don't feel a bit poorer. They feel like their entire financial foundation is crumbling. Imagine this. You saved for 20 years, bought an apartment, watched it double. Then suddenly, it's worth less than you paid. That's not a statistic. That's someone's retirement plan evaporating. That's a family's sense of security disappearing into thin air. But wait, it gets worse. Let's talk about debt. Many homeowners still pay mortgages on apartments now worth much less. Their paycheck might be frozen, or they got laid off. But guess what still comes every month without fail? Mortgage payment. This creates what economists call a balance sheet recession. People focus on paying debt instead of spending or investing anything. Japan went through this after their bubble burst in the 1990s. They called it the lost decade. It actually lasted 30 years. I'm not saying China will follow the same path exactly, but the echoes are there. The patterns are unsettling. See what I mean? Then there's the job market. This is where things get really rough, especially if you're young in China right now. Wild fact. In 2023, China stopped publishing youth unemployment data entirely. Just stopped. For months. Why would they do that? When they brought it back, they'd changed how they count. Students aren't included now. Convenient, right? Numbers instantly looked better. But the reality. In 2025, millions of college graduates enter China's job market yearly. Millions upon millions, every single year, and the jobs? They're not there. At least not the kind matching what these graduates studied for and dreamed about. Millions of educated young people face a brutal mismatch between expectations and reality. That gap breeds deep despair and resentment. Remember lying flat I mentioned? This is where it comes from. When trying hard leads nowhere, why bother trying at all? So we've seen numbers on both sides, but here's what I want you to understand. Why does this painful gap even exist? How can GDP grow while people feel poorer? Seems like a contradiction, but it's not. Let me break down the mechanics. First, GDP measures total economic output. It doesn't tell you how output gets distributed among people. Who gains? Who loses? GDP is silent on those questions. It just gives you one big national number, a country's GPA, if you will, not individual grades. In China's case, growth has been primarily driven by exports and industrial investment. State priorities, infrastructure projects, manufacturing capacity building. But consumption, what regular people spend on daily life, makes up a much smaller share of China's economy compared to developed Western nations. So the economy can grow through exports and investment while household income stagnates. Growth without prosperity for regular people? Here's an analogy that might help. Imagine your company posts record profits. Stock price soars to all-time highs. Everyone's celebrating in the news. But your salary? Frozen for 3 years. Benefits? Cut last quarter. Workload? Doubled since the pandemic. Still feel like celebrating? The company is winning on paper. But are you? That's what's happening to ordinary Chinese citizens right now. Nation wins, people lose. Now, let's talk about what economists call the wealth effect. It's purely psychological, but incredibly powerful in shaping how people behave. When your home value rises, you feel rich, even before selling it. You spend freely, take risks, feel optimistic about everything. But when that same home loses 30%, suddenly you feel poor, anxious. You cut spending, hoard every single dollar. In China, with property being so much of household wealth, falling prices create a massive negative wealth effect across society. And here's the cruel twist that makes it even worse. Many families bought apartments that aren't even finished. Pre-sold properties, then developers went bankrupt. Construction stopped completely. Now these families owe money on homes that might never actually exist. Can you imagine that feeling? You saved for a decade, signed contracts full of hope, paid every month. Now you might end up with nothing but debt. That breaks something inside people. Not just financial pain, a betrayal of the social contract they believed in their whole lives. Let me explain the psychology of falling expectations. This is crucial. Humans don't judge life in absolute terms. We judge relatively. If you grew up expecting each generation to live better, then stagnation doesn't feel neutral. It feels like failure, like going backwards. Now here's where things get interesting. There are two very different ways to interpret everything I just told you about China. Let me give you both sides fairly. I think you deserve to make up your own mind. Ready? Team A says this: ordinary people's lives have genuinely collapsed. Housing crash plus youth unemployment plus weak spending equals a real felt recession. When policy focuses on exports and industry, money doesn't flow to households. Growth stays at the top. Regular people feel abandoned. The government censors negative economic discussion online. If things were fine, why silence people talking about their own struggles? Team A has a point. The pain is real. The despair is documented. Lying flat didn't emerge from a thriving, hopeful society. Now let's hear from Team B. They say Western media is exaggerating for clicks. China isn't collapsing, it's transitioning. And transitions always hurt. GDP hasn't crashed. Exports remain strong. Manufacturing competitiveness is world-class. Trade surplus proves China makes things the world wants. They say China is shifting from property-driven growth to high-tech manufacturing and consumer spending. Pain is the cost of change. Team B has a point too. Countries go through painful transitions. America had the Depression. Japan had lost decades. Maybe China's turn. So who's right? My honest take. Both teams are partially right. And that's exactly what makes this so complicated to untangle. The national economy isn't collapsing, but ordinary people's felt experience has genuinely worsened. Both statements can be simultaneously true. And this brings us to the most important question, one that goes beyond China, one that might apply to your country too. Here it is. When a nation wins economically but citizens feel like they're losing daily, which reality should we believe? The GDP graph going up? Or faces of young people who've given up? Trade surplus announcements? Or families losing their homes? This isn't just a China question. Every modern economy faces it. America, Europe, wherever you're watching this from right now. Because here's the thing. GDP was never designed to measure well-being. It was made during World War II. For measuring war production, we kept using it because it was convenient. But maybe it's time we ask, is this really the best way to measure success? This is where it gets deep. Scholars have studied this exact question for decades. Let me share what they actually found. In 2009, 3 Nobel-level economists released a groundbreaking report. Joseph Stiglitz, Amartya Sen, and Jean-Paul Fitoussi. Absolute legends in the field of economics. They argue GDP doesn't represent social progress or human welfare adequately. It misses too much of what makes life worth living. Think about it. GDP rises when there's a car accident. We buy repairs. It rises when someone gets sick and pays hospital bills. It doesn't count parents raising children at home. Doesn't count volunteers helping communities. Doesn't measure actual happiness at all. But here's where it gets even more interesting. There's a famous debate called the Easterlin paradox, named after economist Richard Easterlin. He found that once basic needs are met, more money doesn't necessarily make people happier long-term. Countries get richer, not happier. Other economists like Stevenson and Wolfers push back. They said richer countries do tend to be happier. The debate continues today, but China has become the ultimate test case for this debate. The laboratory where we can watch these theories play out in real time. There's a famous research study called the China Puzzle. Researchers found that despite massive economic growth, Chinese happiness actually declined quite significantly. From 1990 to 2000, incomes tripled in rural areas, quadrupled in cities. Poverty plummeted. By every measure, life got dramatically better. But reported happiness, it fell. Those describing themselves as very happy dropped from 28% to just 12% that decade. How is that possible? Researchers called them frustrated achievers. Gained absolutely, but fell behind relative to others around them. Humans don't compare themselves to their past selves. They compare to neighbors, classmates, what they see on social media every day. When inequality explodes, even if everyone gets richer, most people feel like they're falling behind. Because relative to winners, they are. And that brings us back to the beginning. Remember my original question? If economy grows but people feel worse, what does success mean? Maybe the question isn't whether China is succeeding or failing. Maybe it's what should success even mean for a society? Is it numbers on a spreadsheet? Or whether ordinary people can afford homes, find meaningful work, and feel hope about tomorrow? So let me ask you directly, where do you feel your country's success? In news graphs? Or your bank account and sense of possibility? That's the question China forces us to confront. A question without easy answers. Today's story ends here. The question stays with you.